My name is Molly. I'm 29 years old and I'm sitting in a lawyer's office with my family listening to my grandmother's will being read. The woman who raised me with more love than my own parents ever showed just left me $10. 10. My brother got $150,000. My sister got $175,000. And me, I got a $10 bill and the sound of my mother's laughter echoing off the walls. But then the lawyer slid an envelope across the table sealed with red wax and my grandmother's handwriting on the front. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe because what this letter revealed will show you why sometimes the smallest inheritance carries the biggest truth. I need to take you back to understand why that moment hurt so much. I grew up in a mid-sized town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and your job title mattered more than your character. My dad, Richard, worked as an accountant at a firm downtown. My mom, Linda, spent 30 years climbing the ladder at a local bank. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable and they were obsessed with keeping up appearances. I was the youngest of 3 kids. My brother Brandon was 4 years older than me, sharp as a tack, graduated top of his class from law school. By the time I was in high school, he was already making 6 figures at a prestigious firm 2 hours away. My sister Stephanie was 2 years older, beautiful and ambitious. She landed a management position at a marketing agency right out of college and never looked back. They were the golden children. The success stories my parents loved to brag about at dinner parties. And then there was me. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't a troublemaker. I just wanted something different. While Brandon studied case law and Stephanie networked at corporate events, I spent my time reading to kids at the library and volunteering at after-school programs. When it came time to pick a major, I chose elementary education. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to shape young minds to be the kind of person who made a difference in a child's life. My parents were horrified. I still remember the night I told them over dinner. My mom set down her fork, looked at me like I'd just announced I was dropping out entirely, and said, "A teacher, Molly, you could do so much better than that." My dad chimed in about the salary, the lack of prestige, the wasted potential. They spent the next hour comparing me to Brandon and Stephanie, listing all the ways I was falling short before I'd even started. But my grandmother, Eleanor. She pulled me aside after that dinner, held both my hands in hers, and said, "Teaching is noble work, honey. You're shaping futures. Don't let anyone make you feel small for choosing love over money." Grandma Eleanor was my sanctuary. She'd been widowed young in her early 30s and had raised my mom on her own while running a small sewing shop downtown. By the time I came along, she'd been stitching wedding dresses and hemming pants for over 40 years. Her shop smelled like fabric and lavender sachets. The walls were covered in photographs of brides she'd dressed babies in christening gowns, families she'd helped celebrate milestones. I spent so many afternoons there. After school, I'd walk the 6 blocks to her shop and sit at the little table in the back corner while she worked. She'd let me play with scraps of lace and ribbon, teach me basic stitches, tell me stories about her customers. While she sewed, I'd tell her about books I was reading, essays I was writing, dreams I had about my own classroom someday. She never once made me feel foolish. I remember one afternoon when I was maybe 12 years old. I'd failed a math test and I was crying because I knew my parents would be disappointed. Grandma stopped her sewing machine, pulled up a stool next to me, and said, "Sweetheart, you know what I've learned in 70-some years. People will always have opinions about what you should be, but the only opinion that matters is your own. You're kind, you're smart, and you care about people. That's worth more than any grade." She made chocolate chip cookies every single time I visited. The recipe was hers, passed down from her own mother, and she'd never written it down. She'd just pull out the ingredients and work from memory, humming old songs, while the kitchen filled with that warm, sweet smell. We'd sit at her kitchen table dunking cookies in milk, and she'd ask me real questions. Not the surface-level things my parents asked. She wanted to know what made me happy, what scared me, what I thought about life. When I graduated from college with my teaching degree, my parents didn't come to the ceremony. They said they were busy. Brandon had a case. Stephanie had a work trip. But Grandma Eleanor drove 3 hours to be there. She sat in the front row, clapped louder than anyone, and took me out to dinner afterward. She gave me a necklace that night, a small silver pendant shaped like an open book. "For all the stories you'll help your students write," she said. I wore it every day. But as the years went on, I started to feel the weight of my family's disappointment more and more. I got a job teaching 3rd grade at a public elementary school 20 minutes from where I grew up. The pay was exactly as low as my parents predicted. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with outdated appliances and a landlord who took weeks to fix things. I drove a car that was older than some of my students. I clipped coupons. I budgeted carefully. Meanwhile, Brandon bought a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage. He married Julia, a surgeon, and they went on vacations to Europe twice a year. Stephanie got promoted to senior management, started driving a luxury SUV, and posted photos from 5-star resorts on social media. Family gatherings became unbearable. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday party turned into a showcase of their achievements. My parents would steer every conversation toward Brandon's latest case or Stephanie's recent bonus. Relatives would ask about their homes, their cars, their plans. And when someone politely asked what I was up to, my mom would wave a hand and say, "Oh, Molly teaches little kids," in a tone that made it sound like I was wasting my life. I stopped talking at those dinners. I'd sit quietly, push food around my plate, and count the minutes until I could leave. The only reason I kept going was Grandma Eleanor. She'd sit next to me, hold my hand under the table, and whisper, "I see you, sweetheart. Don't forget that." After dinner, when everyone else was busy showing off photos or talking business, Grandma would pull me into the kitchen. We'd wash dishes together, and she'd ask about my students. She wanted to know their names, their personalities, the breakthroughs they were making. She celebrated a kid learning to read with the same enthusiasm my parents reserved for 6-figure salaries. "You're doing important work," she'd say, drying a plate with her worn dish towel. "Don't you ever doubt that." One night, when I was maybe 26, she hugged me before I left and said, "I'm proud of you, Molly, more than you know." Her eyes were wet, and I remember thinking it was strange because Grandma didn't cry easily. But I hugged her back, told her I loved her, and drove home thinking about how lucky I was to have at least one person in my family who understood me. I didn't know then how much that moment would mean. I didn't know it was her way of telling me she saw everything. The loneliness, the rejection, the quiet strength it took to keep showing up to a family that didn't value me. I thought we had years left. I thought I'd have more time to tell her how much she meant to me. But 3 years later, on a Friday morning in October, my mom called while I was teaching. I stepped into the hallway, and she told me in a flat, emotionless voice that Grandma had passed away in her sleep. A stroke. Quick and painless, the doctors said. She was 78 years old. I don't remember driving home that day. I don't remember much of the next week except the weight in my chest and the way my apartment felt too quiet. I cried until I had nothing left. And the only thing that made it worse was knowing I'd never have another afternoon in her sewing shop, never taste her chocolate chip cookies again, never hear her tell me I was enough. The funeral was on a Wednesday. It was a small service at the church Grandma attended for 50 years, a modest building with stained glass windows and wooden pews worn smooth by generations of worshippers. The place was packed. I was shocked by how many people came. Former customers, neighbors, members of her quilting group, people whose lives she'd touched in ways I never fully knew about. They all had stories. The woman whose wedding dress Grandma had sewn for free because she couldn't afford it. The man whose daughter's christening gown Grandma had mended after a clumsy accident the morning of the ceremony. The elderly couple who said Grandma had brought them meals when they were both sick. I sat in the front row and cried through the entire service. I couldn't stop. Every hymn, every story, every memory just broke me open all over again. I looked around at my family and felt completely alone. My mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but her tears seemed performative, like she was crying because it was expected. My dad sat stiff and stoic, checking his watch twice during the service. Brandon and Stephanie were on their phones between readings, texting, scrolling, barely present. After the service, people came up to me. They hugged me, told me how much Grandma loved me, said things like, "She talked about you all the time, and you were her favorite, you know." I nodded, thanked them, tried to hold myself together. But inside I was screaming. Why didn't I visit more? Why didn't I call more often? Why didn't I tell her every single day how much she meant to me? That night, back at my parents' house after the reception, I overheard Stephanie and Brandon talking in the kitchen. I'd gone upstairs to splash water on my face, and when I came back down, I heard their voices drifting through the doorway. "I wonder how much Grandma left us," Stephanie said. Her tone was casual, like she was asking about the weather. "Probably split it evenly," Brandon replied. "She was always fair about that kind of thing." "God, I hope so. I could really use it for the down payment on that lake house." Brandon laughed. "I was thinking the same thing. Julia and I have been looking at investment properties." I stood there in the hallway frozen. My grandmother had been in the ground for less than 8 hours, and they were already counting her money. I felt sick. I wanted to walk in there and scream at them, ask them if they even cared that she was gone, if they remembered a single meaningful conversation they'd had with her. But I didn't. I just turned around, grabbed my coat, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. The following week, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from a law office downtown from a Mr. Harrison stating that Grandma Eleanor's will would be read the following Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. All immediate family members were required to attend. I stared at that letter for a long time, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I didn't care about money. I would have traded every dollar in the world for one more afternoon with her. But I knew my family cared, and I knew this meeting was going to be ugly. I spent that week cleaning out Grandma's house. My parents had asked me to do it probably because they were too busy and figured I had nothing better to do. I took time off work, drove to her little 2-story home on the edge of town, and walked through rooms that still smelled like her. Lavender and vanilla, old books and fabric softener. Her sewing room was exactly as she'd left it. The machine sat on the table by the window thread, still loaded a half-finished quilt draped over the chair. I sat down in that chair and cried. I found boxes of old photographs. Me as a baby in her arms. Me at 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a crooked attempt at embroidery. Me at 16, sitting on her porch with a book. There were dozens of pictures of me carefully labeled with dates and little notes in her handwriting. Molly's first day of kindergarten. Molly graduates high school. My sweet girl. I found her recipe book, the one she'd always said she'd write down someday but never had. Except she had. Every recipe was there, written in her careful script with little notes in the margins. Molly loves these. Make extra for Molly. My name was everywhere. I also found letters. Letters I'd written to her as a kid when she went on a trip to visit a cousin out of state. Letters I'd sent from college. She'd kept every single one tied with a ribbon stored in a wooden box on her nightstand. I sat on her bed and read through them, remembering the girl I used to be, the one who still believed her family would come around someday. By the time Friday arrived, I was emotionally drained. I didn't want to sit in a lawyer's office and watch my family divvy up Grandma's life like a business transaction. But I went because the letter said I had to. I wore a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to the funeral. I didn't bother with much makeup. I looked tired because I was. I drove downtown, parked on the street, and walked into the old brick building where Mr. Harrison's office was located. It was on the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled like old wood and coffee. I found the door with his name on it, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The receptionist smiled at me, checked my name off a list, and directed me to a conference room at the end of the hall. When I opened the door, my parents were already there. My mom sat with her hands folded on the table, wearing a navy blazer that screamed, "I'm a professional." My dad wore a gray suit, the same one he'd worn to the funeral. They both looked up when I walked in, but neither of them smiled or greeted me. My mom just said, "You're here. Good. Sit down." I sat. A few minutes later, Brandon and Stephanie arrived together. Brandon looked like he'd come straight from court, 3-piece suit, leather briefcase, perfectly combed hair. Stephanie wore a designer dress and heels that probably cost more than my rent. She gave me a quick glance, raised an eyebrow at my plain outfit, and sat down across from me without a word. The room was small, dark wood paneling, a single window overlooking the street. The table was old and scarred, probably older than me. The air felt heavy, thick with expectation. No one spoke. We all just sat there waiting. I stared at the window, watching a maple tree outside sway in the October breeze, wishing I were anywhere else. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened and Mr. Harrison walked in. Mr. Harrison was probably in his early 60s, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm, steady presence that probably came from decades of handling difficult family situations. He wore a dark suit and carried a thick folder. He greeted us politely, shook hands with my parents, nodded at Brandon and Stephanie, and gave me a small, sympathetic smile before sitting down at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he said, opening the folder. "I know this is a difficult time, and I'll do my best to make this as straightforward as possible. Mrs. Eleanor's will is clear and legally sound. She was of sound mind when she drafted it, and everything has been properly notarized and witnessed." He pulled out a stack of papers and began reading. His voice was steady, almost soothing as he went through the preliminary details. Grandma's full name, the date the will was drafted, a statement affirming that she was not under any undue influence or coercion. Then he moved on to the specific bequests. Small items first. Her antique sewing machine was to be donated to the local historical society. Her jewelry, most of it simple and inexpensive, was to be sold at an estate sale with proceeds going to the church. Her books were left to the public library. I felt a pang in my chest at each item. These were pieces of her life, and they were being cataloged and distributed like inventory. I glanced around the table. My parents looked bored. Brandon was checking something on his phone under the table. Stephanie was examining her nails. No one seemed to care about Grandma's sewing machine or her book collection. They were waiting for the money. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and continued. "Now to the monetary assets and property." The room went still. Everyone sat up a little straighter. Brandon put his phone away. Stephanie folded her hands on the table. My mom leaned forward. My dad adjusted his glasses. To my grandson Brandon, Mr. Harrison read, "I leave the sum of $150,000 from my savings account to be transferred upon the finalization of this will. It is my hope that Brandon will use this money wisely to continue his career in law and to serve his community with integrity." Brandon smiled. It was a small, satisfied smile, like he'd just won something. He nodded, and my mom reached over to squeeze his hand. "Congratulations, honey," she whispered. Mr. Harrison continued. "To my granddaughter Stephanie, I leave my investment portfolio valued at approximately $175,000. It is my hope that Stephanie will invest this money wisely for her future and the future of her family." Stephanie's face lit up. She grinned at Brandon, and the two of them exchanged a look that made my stomach turn. My mom actually clapped her hands together softly, beaming with pride. "Oh, Stephanie, that's wonderful." I sat there gripping the edge of my chair, feeling smaller and smaller with every word. I knew what was coming. I'd known from the moment I got the letter. Grandma had left me something, but it wasn't going to be much. Not compared to Brandon's law career fund or Stephanie's investment portfolio. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that Grandma loved me, and that was what counted. But sitting there watching my siblings receive six-figure inheritances while my parents fawned over them, I felt like the loneliest person in the world. Mr. Harrison paused. He looked at me over his glasses, and for just a second, I thought I saw something like pity in his eyes. Then he looked back down at the will and read, "And now to my youngest granddaughter Molly." The room went completely silent. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I waited for him to name a smaller number, maybe 20,000, maybe 10. I didn't care. I just wanted this to be over. But what he said next made the floor drop out from under me. "I leave the sum of $10. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was like the words hadn't fully registered. $10. Not 10,000. 10. And then Stephanie started laughing. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a surprised giggle. It was a full, loud, mocking laugh. She clapped a hand over her mouth, but her shoulders shook and the sound filled the room. Brandon tried to keep a straight face, but a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He looked down at the table, but I could see him fighting back laughter. My mom let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind of sigh that said she was deeply disappointed, but not surprised. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "That's unexpected." My dad shook his head, looking at me like I was a problem he'd never figured out how to solve. $10. "Molly, did you upset Grandma somehow? Did something happen?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. My face was burning. My hands were shaking. I stared at the table, at the wood grain, at a scratch near the edge, anywhere but at their faces. $10. My grandmother, the woman who told me she was proud of me, who said I mattered, had left me $10. Stephanie couldn't hold it in anymore. She leaned back in her chair, laughing openly now. $10? Oh my God, Molly, what did you do? Did you forget her birthday or something? Brandon joined in, his voice laced with amusement. Come on, Stephanie, don't be mean. $10 is still something. That's like, what, 2 coffees? Barely. Stephanie shot back, wiping a tear from her eye. Maybe Grandma thought Molly needed lunch money. My mom turned to me, her expression a mix of pity and irritation. Molly, honey, are you sure you were visiting Grandma enough? Maybe if you'd spent more time with her instead of focusing so much on those kids at school. Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I visited Grandma every single week, that I was the one who drove her to doctor's appointments, that I was the one who sat with her when she was lonely. But my throat was tight and my eyes were burning with tears I refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of them. My dad rubbed his temples. This is embarrassing. What will people think when they find out one of our children got $10? It makes the whole family look bad. Stephanie was still laughing. I mean, seriously, Molly. $10. That's not even an inheritance. That's a tip. Brandon smirked. Maybe Grandma finally figured out what we all knew. That you've never been serious about success. Never been serious about anything. Their words blurred together. I felt like I was underwater drowning, and no one was reaching out to pull me up. I was 29 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office being mocked by my own family because my grandmother had left me $10. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. My chest ached. My head throbbed. I wanted to run out of that room and never look back. But then Mr. Harrison did something that changed everything. He stood up. Slowly, deliberately. His chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the laughter like a knife. He looked at my mother, at Stephanie, at Brandon, and his expression was cold, disapproving. That's enough, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Stephanie stopped mid-laugh. Brandon straightened in his seat. My mom blinked, clearly taken aback. My dad opened his mouth to say something, but Mr. Harrison held up a hand. Please show some respect. We're not finished here. He reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, made of cream-colored paper, and sealed with a red wax stamp. My grandmother's handwriting was on the front, looping and elegant, the kind of handwriting that belonged to a different generation. It said, "To Molly. Open when they stop laughing." Mr. Harrison walked around the table and handed it to me. His hand was steady. His eyes were kind. Your grandmother left specific instructions, he said softly. This letter is for you alone, but she requested that you open it now in front of everyone. I took the envelope with shaking hands. The paper felt heavy. The wax seal was smooth under my thumb. I looked up at Mr. Harrison, confused, and he nodded. Go ahead, Molly. Read it. I looked around the table. My family was staring at me now, no longer laughing. Curiosity had replaced their amusement. Stephanie leaned forward. What is that, another joke? Brandon narrowed his eyes. Let me see it. But I didn't hand it over. I broke the seal, the wax cracking under my fingers, and unfolded the letter. My grandmother's handwriting filled the page. Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away and started to read. My dearest Molly, if you're reading this, they've already shown you who they truly are. I'm sorry you had to sit through that, sweetheart, but it was necessary. You see, I needed you to witness their reaction to the $10. I needed you to see with your own eyes how quickly they would mock you, dismiss you, and reveal their true priorities. That $10 bill isn't just money, Molly. Do you remember when you were 7 years old and you came to my sewing shop with your little plastic purse? You'd saved up your allowance for months and you gave me every penny, $10 total, because you'd heard me mention that business was slow. You said, "Grandma, this is for you, so you won't be sad." I cried that day, honey. I've kept that $10 in a frame in my bedroom ever since. That's the bill you're inheriting. It represents the purest love I've ever known. I paused, unable to see the words through my tears. I remembered that day. I remembered my little plastic purse shaped like a strawberry. I remembered being so worried about Grandma, so sure that my $10 would fix everything. I'd forgotten about it over the years, but she hadn't. She'd kept it, framed it, treasured it. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. Now let me tell you what your parents, your brother, and your sister don't know. Over the past 30 years, I built my little sewing business into something much bigger than they realized. I invested wisely, saved carefully, and purchased property when the market was low. I own the building where my shop was located. I own 3 rental properties downtown. I have stocks, bonds, and a trust fund that has been growing for decades. The money I left Brandon and Stephanie, that's all they're getting. It's generous, yes, but it's a fraction of my estate. The bulk of my assets, valued at approximately $1.2 million, goes to you, Molly. It's all in a trust managed by Mr. Harrison, who will explain the details after you finish reading this letter. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped the letter. $1.2 million. I read that sentence 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. 1.2 million. The room spun. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked up at Mr. Harrison and he nodded, confirming it was true. I looked back down at the letter, my vision swimming. Why am I doing this? Because you're the only one who ever loved me for who I was, not what I had. You visited me every single week, even when you were exhausted from teaching. You asked about my day. You laughed at my old jokes. You helped me in the garden, fixed my computer, and sat with me during doctor's appointments. You never once asked me about money or inheritance. You just loved me. Your brother and sister. They called twice a year on my birthday and Christmas, 5-minute conversations at most. Your parents visited during holidays, but they spent the whole time talking about themselves. None of them really saw me. But you did. I'm leaving you this fortune not to make you rich, Molly, but to give you freedom. Freedom to teach because you love it, not because you have to. Freedom to travel during summer breaks. Freedom to never feel less than anyone because of a bank account. And most importantly, freedom from a family that never deserved you. Use this wisely, my darling girl. Buy yourself a home. Invest in your future. Help your students. Live the life you've always wanted. And please, please don't feel obligated to share this with people who have spent years making you feel small. You owe them nothing. I love you more than words can say. You were my greatest joy. Forever yours. Grandma Eleanor. P.S. The house is yours too. I know you love the garden. I finished reading and just sat there clutching the letter to my chest. Tears streamed down my face, but I wasn't sad anymore. I was overwhelmed, grateful, vindicated. My grandmother had seen everything. She'd understood. She'd loved me not in spite of who I was, but because of it. And she'd made sure in the most powerful way possible that I would never doubt that again. I looked up. The entire room was staring at me. My mom's face had gone pale. My dad's mouth hung open. Stephanie looked like she'd been slapped. Brandon was frozen, his expression caught between shock and anger. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. He was standing now holding another set of documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and professional, I need to clarify the full scope of Mrs. Eleanor's will. The amounts distributed to Brandon and Stephanie represent their complete and total inheritance. There are no additional funds, properties, or assets designated for them. He paused, letting that sink in. The remainder of the estate, including the family home, 3 rental properties, stocks, bonds, and various investment accounts, have been bequeathed in their entirety to Molly. The estate's total value is approximately $1.2 million. Molly is the primary and sole beneficiary of these assets. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. And then my dad's voice, strangled and disbelieving. What are you talking about? Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. I understand this may come as a surprise, but Mrs. Eleanor was very clear in her instructions. The will is legally binding and was executed according to her wishes. Stephanie shot to her feet. Her chair screeched against the floor. That's impossible. Grandma wouldn't do that. There has to be a mistake. Brandon stood up too, his lawyer instincts kicking in. We need to contest this. This doesn't make sense. There's no way my grandmother would leave everything to Molly. Mr. Harrison's expression hardened. You're welcome to contest the will, Mr. Brandon, but I assure you it will be a waste of your time and money. Mrs. Eleanor drafted this document 5 years ago. She updated it twice, most recently 6 months before her passing. She was evaluated by 2 independent physicians who confirmed she was of sound mind. Everything is airtight. My mom turned to me, her face a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like betrayal. Molly, why would she? I didn't answer. I just folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and held it against my chest like a shield. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in front of them. I felt seen, valued, loved. Stephanie's voice cracked. This isn't fair. We're her grandchildren too. She can't just give everything to Molly. She can, Mr. Harrison said simply. And she did. The room erupted. Brandon started pacing, running his hands through his hair, muttering about legal options and probate court. Stephanie stood with her arms crossed, glaring at me like I'd stolen something from her. My parents just sat there looking lost, like the world had tilted, and they didn't know which way was up anymore. Brandon stopped pacing and turned to me, his voice forced into a calm, reasonable tone that I knew was fake. Molly, listen. Obviously, Grandma was confused in her final days. She was old. People that age, they get, I don't know, sentimental. They make irrational decisions. She wasn't confused, Mr. Harrison interjected sharply. As I said, she was medically evaluated. Brandon ignored him. Molly, think about this logically. You're a school teacher. You don't know the first thing about managing this kind of money. You could lose it all if you're not careful. But I'm a lawyer. I understand finances, investments, legal structures. Let me help you. We can set up a trust, divide things more fairly. Everyone wins. I just looked at him. He didn't even sound sincere. He sounded desperate. Stephanie stepped closer, her tone shifting to something softer, more pleading. Molly, we're sisters. You wouldn't keep all of this from me, would you? Think about what's right. Grandma would want us to share. She'd want the family to stay together. I almost laughed. The family. The same family that had spent years making me feel worthless. The same sister who'd mocked me not 10 minutes ago for getting $10. My mom stood up, smoothing her blazer, trying to regain some sense of control. Sweetheart, you don't understand how money works. Let Dad and me help you. We can manage the accounts, make sure you're taken care of. You're too young to handle this kind of responsibility on your own. My dad nodded eagerly. We'll set everything up properly. You won't have to worry about a thing. We'll invest it, grow it. Think of it as a family asset. A family asset. They wanted to take my inheritance and turn it into something they controlled. Something they could claim credit for. Something they could use to continue making me feel like I didn't know what I was doing. I looked at Mr. Harrison. He was watching me carefully, and I could see the question in his eyes. He was waiting to see what I would do, waiting to see if I'd fold under the pressure. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I forced them to hold me. I looked at Brandon first. When was the last time you visited Grandma outside of a holiday? He blinked. I don't see what that has to do with... Answer the question. He shifted uncomfortably. I was busy. I had cases. She understood. Did she... I turned to Stephanie. What about you? When was the last time you called her just to say hello? Stephanie's eyes darted away. I texted her. Sometimes. Texted? I repeated. How thoughtful. I looked at my parents. And you two. When was the last time you asked her how she was doing, not what she could do for you, not if she was babysitting or hosting dinner? Just how she was. My mom opened her mouth, but no words came out. I took a deep breath. My voice came out steady, stronger than I'd ever heard it. Do you know what's funny? 10 minutes ago, you were all laughing at me. You mocked me. You insulted me. You made me feel worthless. And now suddenly, we're family. Now suddenly you care about what's fair. Molly, we didn't mean... My dad started. Yes, you did, I said, cutting him off. You meant every word. You've spent my entire adult life making me feel like I wasn't good enough. Like my job didn't matter. Like I was a disappointment. And you want to know why Grandma left me everything? Read the letter. I held it up. She explains it all. She knew. She saw what you were. She saw how you treated me. And she made sure in the most powerful way possible that you would finally understand what you lost. Stephanie's face crumpled. She started crying real tears this time. Molly, please. I'm sorry. We were wrong. I was wrong. But don't shut us out. We can fix this. Brandon stepped forward. Come on, Molly. We didn't mean those things. It was just shock. You have to understand. No, I said firmly. I don't have to understand anything. And you know what, I forgive you. Not for your sake, for mine. Because holding on to anger is only going to hurt me. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to let you use me anymore. I turned to Mr. Harrison. When can we finalize the paperwork? He didn't smile, but there was approval in his eyes. I can have everything ready by next week. We'll need to transfer the accounts, deed the properties into your name, and set up the trust as your grandmother specified. It's a straightforward process. I nodded. Thank you. My dad stood up, his voice rising. Molly, wait. You can't just walk away. Let's talk about this like adults. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a child in his presence. I felt like an equal. Dad, you've never talked to me like an adult. You've talked at me, down to me, but never with me. I'm done waiting for you to see me. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Stephanie rushed forward, grabbing my arm. Please, Molly, don't do this. We're family. I gently pulled my arm away. Some things can't be fixed, Stephanie. Some things are just broken. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The afternoon light was streaming through the window at the end of the corridor, warm and golden. I could hear my family behind me, their voices overlapping, desperate pleading. But I didn't turn around. I walked down that hallway, down the stairs, and out onto the street. The October air was cool and crisp. The leaves on the trees were brilliant shades of red and orange. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, feeling the weight of the envelope in my hand and the lightness in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt free. The first few weeks after the will reading were strange. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Texts from Stephanie, emails from Brandon, voicemails from my parents. At first, they were angry. Brandon left a message saying he was consulting with other attorneys, that this wasn't over. Stephanie sent long texts about how hurt she was, how betrayed she felt, how I was tearing the family apart. My dad emailed me articles about financial planning as if I was incapable of figuring it out myself. But I didn't respond. Not to any of them. After a few weeks, the tone shifted. The messages became apologetic. My mom called crying, saying she missed me, that she was sorry, that she wanted to make things right. Stephanie sent a card in the mail with a handwritten note about how much she regretted what she'd said. Brandon showed up at my apartment one Saturday morning with coffee, asking if we could just talk. I didn't answer the door. I wasn't being cruel. I just needed space. I needed time to process everything that had happened, everything I'd learned about my family and about myself. And honestly, I didn't trust them. Their sudden remorse felt less like genuine regret and more like a last-ditch effort to get their hands on the money. I kept living in my little one-bedroom apartment. I kept teaching. I didn't touch the money except to transfer it into a secure account that Mr. Harrison helped me set up. I wasn't ready to think about what to do with it yet. I just wanted to breathe. But I did start seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Patel, and she had a small office above a bookstore downtown. I told her everything. About my childhood, about always feeling like I wasn't enough, about the will reading about the letter. She listened without judgment, and slowly over the course of several sessions, I started to untangle the mess of emotions I'd been carrying for years. "You've been grieving 2 losses," she told me one afternoon. "The loss of your grandmother and the loss of the family you wished you had." She was right. I'd spent so much of my life hoping my parents would change, hoping Brandon and Stephanie would see me, hoping I'd wake up one day and suddenly belong. But Grandma's letter had forced me to see the truth. They weren't going to change, and I didn't need them to. 3 months after the will reading, I made my first big decision. I moved into Grandma's house. It felt right. The little 2-story home on the edge of town with its wraparound porch and overgrown garden had always been my favorite place in the world. Mr. Harrison handled the paperwork, and by early January the house was officially mine. I spent weeks cleaning it, painting the walls, fixing little things that had fallen into disrepair. I kept Grandma's sewing room exactly as it was. I couldn't bring myself to change it. I'd go in there sometimes, sit in her chair, run my fingers over the fabric she'd been working on, and feel close to her again. I planted tulips in the garden that spring, the kind Grandma always loved. I bought new furniture for the living room, nothing fancy, just comfortable and warm. I hung photos on the walls, pictures of me and Grandma, memories I wanted to see every day. The house stopped feeling like a museum and started feeling like home. I kept teaching, but the inheritance gave me a freedom I'd never had before. I didn't have to worry about money. I could focus entirely on my students, on being the kind of teacher I'd always wanted to be. I used some of the money to buy books for my classroom art supplies, new technology. I sponsored field trips for kids whose families couldn't afford them. I started a small fund to help students in need, covering things like winter coats, school supplies, and groceries. One of my students, a little girl named Ava, came to school every day with the same worn-out shoes, soles flapping, toes poking through. I quietly bought her a new pair and left them in a bag in her cubby with a note saying they were from a community donation. She cried when she found them, and so did I. That summer, I traveled. I went to Paris, something Grandma had always dreamed of doing, but never got the chance. I stood at the top of the Eiffel Tower, looked out over the city, and whispered, "This one's for you, Grandma." I went to Ireland, walked along the cliffs of Moher, felt the wind in my hair and the salt spray on my face. I went to the coast of Maine, rented a little cabin by the ocean, and spent a week reading and painting and just being still. I also set up a scholarship fund in Grandma's name, the Eleanor Grant Scholarship. Every year it would provide $5,000 to 2 students who wanted to pursue a career in education. The first recipients were announced that fall, 2 young women from low-income families who dreamed of becoming teachers. I met them at a small ceremony at the community college, and when they hugged me and thanked me, I thought about Grandma and how proud she would have been. I made new friends, real friends, people who valued me for who I was, not what I had. My coworker Sarah became one of my closest friends. We'd have dinner every Friday night, swapping stories about our students and laughing until we cried. My neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, taught me how to fix the plumbing in my house and told me stories about Grandma from when they were young. I joined a book club at the library, started volunteering at a community garden, and slowly built a life that felt full and meaningful. I didn't talk to my family. Not for months. And then one cold afternoon in late November, almost a year after Grandma's death, my mom showed up at my door. I opened it and found her standing on my porch looking smaller than I remembered. Older. She wasn't wearing her usual polished blazer and heels, just a simple coat and boots. Her hair was grayer. Her eyes were red. "Molly," she said quietly, "can I come in?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to close the door. But another part, the part that still remembered being a little girl who just wanted her mom to love her, stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room. I made tea more out of habit than hospitality. She looked around the house, taking in the changes I'd made, the photos on the walls, the warmth I'd created. She was quiet for a long time, holding her mug, but not drinking. Finally, she spoke. "I came to apologize. Really apologize." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I was wrong," she continued, her voice shaking. "We all were. Your father, Brandon, Stephanie, me. We treated you terribly. We made you feel like you weren't good enough, and that was cruel and unfair. I don't have an excuse. I was focused on the wrong things. Success, money, status. I thought that's what mattered. But I was wrong." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Your grandmother saw what we couldn't. She saw how kind you are, how much you care about people, how much you loved her. And she tried to tell us, Molly. She tried so many times. But we didn't listen." I felt my own eyes stinging, but I stayed quiet. "I don't expect you to forgive me," my mom said. "I don't even know if I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did to you. And I'm so, so sorry." I took a deep breath. "I appreciate you saying that, Mom. I do." But she asked because she could hear it in my voice. "But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. I've forgiven you because holding on to anger was hurting me, not you. But I need you to understand something. I'm building a life where I'm valued, where people see me and appreciate me for who I am. And right now, that doesn't include regular family dinners and pretending nothing happened." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. I hope someday—" "Maybe someday," I said. "But not today." We talked for another hour. It was painful, but it was honest. She asked about my life, about my students, about the house. She told me that my dad was struggling with what had happened, that Brandon and Stephanie were both seeing therapists, that the family had fractured in ways she didn't know how to fix. I listened, but I didn't offer solutions. That wasn't my job anymore. When she left, she hugged me at the door. It was awkward and stiff, but it was something. "I love you, Molly," she said. "I know I didn't show it the way I should have, but I do." "I know," I said, and I did. In her own broken, misguided way she probably always had. She just didn't know how to show it in a way that mattered. After she left, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the garden. The tulips I'd planted were dormant now, waiting for spring. I thought about Grandma, about the letter, about the year I'd had. I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who just wanted to be loved, and the woman I was, now the one who'd learned to love herself. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos. I scrolled to a picture of me and Grandma taken a few months before she died. We were in her garden, both of us laughing, dirt on our hands, sun in our faces. I stared at that photo for a long time, and then I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for everything." People always say blood is thicker than water, but the full quote is, "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb." It means the bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. Grandma taught me that. She chose me, and I chose her. And that love, that intentional, unconditional love, was worth more than any inheritance. The money gave me freedom, yes. But the real gift was her final lesson. You don't owe loyalty to people who make you feel small. You owe yourself the dignity of walking away. I don't know if my family and I will ever be close again. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I'm okay with that uncertainty now. Because I finally understand that my worth isn't determined by their approval. It never was. I stood up and walked back into the house, into the warmth, into the life I'd built. I looked around at the photos, the books, the evidence of a life lived with intention and love, and I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not because of money, not because my family finally saw me, but because I finally saw myself. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the permission to finally love yourself. So let me ask you this. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever been the one who gave everything and got nothing in return? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this video resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your worth isn't defined by anyone else's opinion. You are enough exactly as you are. Take care of yourselves and remember the people who truly love you will never make you feel small.